Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're going to be exploring a connection as intense as it is influential, the relationship between Swami Vivekananda, who, he basically introduced Eastern spirituality to the West, and his guru, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa.
And you know what makes their story so compelling is that they were, on the surface, complete opposites.
Oh, yeah.
Vivekananda, or Narendranath, as he was known then, was a product of 19th century Calcutta, exposed to Western philosophy and a member of the Brahmo Samaj, a movement that emphasized reason and social reform.
Right.
So imagine his reaction when he encounters Ramakrishna, this ecstatic, deeply devotional mystic.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Talk about a clash of worldviews.
Now, you mentioned the Brahmo Samaj for our listener who might not be, familiar. Can you give us a little context on that?
Of course.
Yeah.
The Brahmo Samaj was essentially a reform movement within Hinduism.
Okay.
They rejected traditional rituals and idol worship, focusing instead on a more rational and ethical approach to faith. This was the intellectual and spiritual environment that shaped Narendranath's early thinking.
So not exactly fertile ground for embracing someone like Ramakrishna, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
And we're going to dive deep into those early interactions using Swami Vivekananda at the feet of Ramakrishna as our guide.
Okay.
It's a fascinating look at how these two went from skepticism and resistance to a bond that literally changed the course of history.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with Ramakrishna.
Sure.
Even for a saint, he was pretty unconventional.
Yeah.
What made him so different, so compelling?
Well, for one, his approach to spirituality was intensely experiential.
Okay.
It wasn't about dogma or intellectual debate. It was about direct personal experience of the divine, and this came through in everything he did, from ecstatic visions at a young age to embracing extreme spiritual practices.
Right.
He was driven by this insatiable thirst for God realization.
I'm fascinated by this idea of disregarding social norms in the pursuit of truth. Like, even his marriage was a statement. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Ramakrishna ended up worshiping his wife as the Divine Mother.
Wow.
This wasn't some symbolic gesture. It reflected a fundamental shift in his perception, blurring the lines between the earthly and the divine, which was a core element of his teachings.
Right.
To him, everything was infused with the divine presence, even the seemingly mundane.
So there's this constant seeking, this intensity that sets him apart, but he also seemed frustrated by the lack of genuine seekers around him.
Right.
I'm thinking of the milk and water analogy from the book. What was that about?
Ah, yes. Ramakrishna often felt let down by people he considered worldly. They were like water, he said, diluting the thick milk of true spirituality.
Wow.
He longed for disciples who shared his yearning for direct experience, for genuine spiritual transformation.
And then enter young Narendranath, our skeptical intellectual hero. Here's a guy who was exposed to Western thought, to the rationalism of the Brahmo Samaj, and his first impression of Ramakrishna is
not great, to say the least.
Yeah.
He saw him as possibly insane. The rituals and visions were completely outside his frame of reference.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a guy who is used to logic, to reason, to tangible evidence.
So what happens when these two opposing forces collide? Take us to that first meeting. What was so momentous about it?
Well, the book described this incredibly charged moment where Ramakrishna, upon seeing Narendranath, instantly recognizes his potential.
Wow.
In a burst of emotion, he declares him to be an incarnation of a divine sage. Now, imagine being on the receiving end of that.
I think my skepticism would be on high alert.
Uh-huh.
How did Narendranath react to this?
Just as you'd expect, with resistance.
Okay.
He demands proof, he questions everything. It takes years for him to even begin to accept Ramakrishna.
So we've got this clash of personalities, this battle between logic and experience playing out.
Right.
What were some of those early challenges, those points of friction?
Well, Narendranath was particularly skeptical of the ecstatic visions, calling them hallucinations. And he even mocked Ramakrishna's devotion to Kali, the fierce mother goddess.
Right.
Imagine the audacity of a young man challenging a revered spiritual figure like that.
That took some guts, I have to admit.
Right.
But Ramakrishna didn't seem fazed by these doubts, did he?
Not at all. He had this remarkable patience with Narendranath, never forcing belief, but rather using those doubts as teaching moments.
Interesting.
There are these fascinating anecdotes in the book where Ramakrishna would touch Naren, sending him into these altered states of consciousness.
And then Naren would turn around and accuse him of hypnotism. Right, he was desperately trying to find a rational explanation for these experiences that were shaking his worldview.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this internal struggle between rationality and mystical experience comes through even more vividly in the episode where Ramakrishna has a vision of 7 sages.
Okay.
He uses this vision to explain Naren's unique spiritual heritage in this mystical, almost mythical way.
But there's this one line that really gets to me. Ramakrishna simply says, "I see God as I see you." Something about the simplicity of that statement, the conviction, it's just chilling.
That's Ramakrishna for you.
Yeah.
Cutting through all the intellectual clutter, getting straight to the heart of his truth. He didn't debate. He embodied his experience.
And that's just the beginning. We haven't even gotten to the power of love that really binds them together. I think we need to dive into that next.
All right, so we've established that this wasn't exactly love at first sight. There was a lot of resistance, a lot of intellectual sparring going on. But amidst all that, a powerful bond was forming. Let's delve into that a bit. What role did love play in this unusual relationship? Well, it's important to remember that Ramakrishna's love wasn't simply emotional. It was rooted in his deep spiritual insight. He saw Naren's true potential, his divine spark, even when Naren himself was blinded by doubt. And this unwavering belief, this profound love, is what eventually breaks down those walls of resistance.
And it wasn't subtle either. The book is full of these almost embarrassing displays of affection from Ramakrishna towards Naren.
Absolutely. He would openly declare his love for Naren, often in ways that made him uncomfortable. He compared him to other great spiritual figures, saying things like, "This boy has 18 virtues." It was almost like he couldn't contain his love and admiration.
I can only imagine how Naren must have felt. I mean, here he is, this young intellectual trying to reconcile his rational mind with these intense mystical experiences, and his guru is showering him with this almost overwhelming love.
It's a fascinating dynamic. On one hand, Naren is drawn to Ramakrishna's genuine warmth and spiritual depth, but on the other hand, he's embarrassed by the effusive praise and tries to rationalize it away as some kind of psychological projection.
There's this one exchange that really highlights this push and pull. Ramakrishna asks Naren, "Why do you come here if you don't accept Kali, my mother?" And Naren shoots back with, "Bah, must I accept her simply because I come to see you? I come to you because I love you."
That line really gets to the heart of their connection. Naren's bond with Ramakrishna transcended any doctrinal beliefs. He was drawn to the man himself, to his authenticity and unconditional love.
And this is where we see the genius of Ramakrishna. He wasn't threatened by Naren's doubts or criticisms. In fact, he often praised his sharp mind and independent spirit. It's like he understood that this intellectual wrestling was a crucial part of Naren's journey.
Exactly. He saw those doubts not as obstacles, but as stepping stones, and he provided the space for Naren to grapple with them, to challenge him, and to ultimately arrive at his own understanding.
Which brings us to a really crucial point. This relationship wasn't just about Ramakrishna imparting wisdom to a passive disciple. It was a dynamic, evolving exchange. What were some of the specific things that Naren challenged Ramakrishna on? What were those intellectual and philosophical debates like?
Well, remember, Naren was steeped in the rationalism of the Brahmo Samaj and Western philosophy. He questioned the validity of Ramakrishna's ecstatic visions, attributing them to psychological phenomena. He also challenged his devotion to Kali, finding the imagery and rituals difficult to reconcile with his own understanding of God.
So how did Ramakrishna respond to these challenges? Did they ever find common ground?
Ramakrishna never tried to force his beliefs on Naren. He would listen patiently, offer his perspective, and ultimately encourage Naren to find his own truth through direct experience.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of their bond, the intensity of it. Ramakrishna wasn't just a teacher or mentor to Naren, he was deeply attached to him, almost like a parent to a child.
Absolutely. The book describes Ramakrishna constantly sending for Naren. Unable to bear his absence for too long, he even showed up at Brahmo Samaj meetings and visited Naren's home in these ecstatic states, crying out, "Naren, my beloved."
While that level of devotion is certainly touching, I can't help but wonder if it might have felt a bit stifling or overwhelming to Naren at times.
It's certainly possible, and you can see that tension in their interactions. Naren was drawn to Ramakrishna's love, but he also needed his space to think, to question, to forge his own path.
And it's in that space, that tension between surrender and independence, that the real transformation happens.
right? It's not a straightforward linear process. It's messy, it's emotional, it's full of contradictions, and yet it's precisely through that struggle that Naren eventually evolves into the Swami Vivekananda we know today.
It's a powerful reminder that spiritual growth isn't about blind faith or unquestioning obedience. It's about wrestling with doubts, challenging assumptions, and ultimately arriving at a deeper understanding through both head and heart.
And that process is often messy and uncomfortable, but also incredibly transformative. I think it's something that resonates with all of us, whether we're on a spiritual path or simply navigating the complexities of life.
Absolutely. And speaking of navigating complexities, we've only just scratched the surface of this incredible story. We've seen the initial resistance, the intellectual sparring, the blossoming of an unconventional love, but what happens next? How does this relationship shape the future? Swami Vivekananda.
I think it's time to dive into the next chapter of their journey. So we've seen Narendranath, transform from this skeptical young man into Ramakrishna's devoted disciple. But we've really only just scratched the surface of their journey together. As their connection deep, a new layer unfolds, one tinged with urgency and a sense of legacy. What happens as Ramakrishna's health begins to decline?
Well, this is where the narrative takes on a poignant, almost bittersweet tone. Ramakrishna is diagnosed with throat cancer.
Oh, wow.
And knowing his time is limited, he becomes laser focused on preparing Naren for his future role.
It's like a spiritual passing of the torch, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. The sense of urgency to impart as much wisdom and guidance as possible before it's too late.
Ramakrishna recognizes Naren's extraordinary potential to carry his message of universal acceptance and practical spirituality to the world. He starts entrusting him with more responsibility, encouraging him to lead their growing group of disciples. But keep in mind, this isn't a sudden transformation into a fully realized guru. Naren is still grappling with his own doubts and navigating his own unique spiritual path.
That's an important nuance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It humanizes the process. We often think of spiritual enlightenment as the sudden dramatic shift, but the reality is often much more gradual and nuanced.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Naren's evolution so compelling. He doesn't shy away from those challenges or pretend to have all the answers. He embraces the struggle. We see him becoming a tireless student, absorbing Ramakrishna's teachings, deepening his meditation practice, and dedicating himself to serving the poor and sick.
It's like all those years of intellectual wrestling, of questioning and challenging, laid the groundwork for something much bigger. He integrated those skeptical, rational tendencies into his spiritual practice rather than trying to suppress them.
Exactly. And as Ramakrishna's physical body weakens, his spiritual influence on Naren seems to intensify. There's this beautiful moment in the book where Naren is caring for the ailing Ramakrishna, and he has this profound realization. It's not just his guru that he sees the divine in, it's everyone around him. So it's like Ramakrishna's teaching about seeing God in all beings finally clicks for him on an experiential level. It becomes embodied, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and this realization is a pivotal moment. It forms the very foundation of Vivekananda's message of universal love and service. He starts to perceive this inherent divinity in all beings, regardless of their faith, social status, or even their perceived flaws.
Which is pretty radical for the time, right? This idea of breaking down barriers between religions, of seeing everyone as equally worthy of respect and compassion.
Absolutely, and this vision is what propels him onto the world stage after Ramakrishna passes away. Naren, now known as Swami Vivekananda, embarks on a journey across India, eventually making his way to the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. And that's where he delivers his famous speech that captivates the world with his message of universal spirituality. It's a defining moment, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt, his eloquence, charisma, and message of unity resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. He became a global ambassador for Vedanta, offering a fresh, accessible interpretation of ancient wisdom that bridged the gap between East and West.
And it all stems from that transformative relationship with Ramakrishna, those years of questioning, challenging, and ultimately surrendering to a love that transcended boundaries. It shaped him into the spiritual giant he became.
So as we conclude this deep dive, and I want to pose a question to our listener, what resonates most deeply with you about this story? What insights or reflections do you take away from the unique bond between these two figures?
Yeah, it's a story that offers so much richness on multiple levels. We see the power of mentorship, the transformative nature of love, the importance of staying open to experiences that challenge our assumptions.
And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that spirituality isn't about rigid dogma or blind faith. It's about connecting with that deeper sense of unity and purpose that transcends our individual differences. It's about embracing both our intellect and our intuition, our skepticism, and our yearning for something more.
Vivekananda embodied this beautifully. He showed the world that skepticism and deck spirituality can coexist, that one doesn't negate the other. He used his critical thinking to refine and deepen his understanding, not to shut down possibilities.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought to ponder in a world increasingly polarized, in awash in information. Can this approach, embracing both critical thinking and spiritual exploration, be a model for us today? Can it help us find common ground, bridge divides, and arrive at a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us?
That's a question worth exploring, isn't it? This has been just a glimpse into the fascinating world of Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. We encourage you to continue your own deep dive to explore their lives and teachings further. You might be surprised by what you discover. Thank you for joining us.
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.